I too, of course, want to start by proffering thanks to the Meyerhoff Center, the Roshan Institute, which I hope will live up to its name, its wonderful name, and especially to today's generous hosts at the Library of Congress. I would like to talk to you about Judeo-Persian manuscripts, as most of my work, in one way or another, centers around them, and give you a little bit of background before I show you samples of them. The earliest traces of Judeo-Persian manuscripts, basically Farsi, New Persian, written in the Hebrew alphabet, and I do not have the time to describe what Judeo-Persian really is. It's a rather complex language with interesting features. Such manuscripts are to be found, the earliest inscriptions are to be found on tombstones in Afghanistan between the 8th and 13th century. The majority of actual Judeo-Persian manuscripts produced primarily in Iran and Bukhara date considerably later, most having been produced between the 17th and 20th centuries. A small but important group of Judeo-Persian manuscripts from the Cairo Geniza, roughly from the 9th and 13th centuries, that Professor Shaked has done considerable work on, suggests perhaps that the break in manuscript productions between the 13th and 17th century was probably due to the political vicissitudes after the Mongol invasion, as well as probably scarcity of paper. Judging by the quantity of surviving Judeo-Persian manuscripts, and their number is far from insignificant, they must have been produced in respectably large numbers. Having recently completed a catalog of the Judeo-Persian manuscripts hosted at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York, I took the opportunity to inventory Judeo-Persian manuscripts in Western library collections. Their number is nearly 1,200, and who knows how many more can be found in Iran and elsewhere. Clearly, Iranian Jews were considerably literate. Not surprisingly, the largest collection of Judeo-Persian manuscripts these days are in Israel at the Jerusalem National University Library and at the Ben-Zvi Institute. And of course, these were acquired from immigrants who came to Israel. The contents of Judeo-Persian manuscripts tend heavily towards belles-lettres, especially poetry, with religious literature in clear second place. This immediately tells you that Iranian Jews loved belles-lettres as much as Iranian Muslims. Medical texts and folk remedies are also well represented, while historical, philosophical, and halachic texts are relatively sparse. The rather small number of illuminated manuscripts that have surfaced thus far confirms that Iranian Jews share the aesthetic, not only the literary inclinations of their Muslim compatriots. A full evaluation awaits the complete cataloging of all collections, especially the one at the Jewish National University Library in Jerusalem. Closer statistical analysis of contents will then reveal a more nuanced appreciation of Iranian Jewry's intellectual parameters in pre-modern times. As many of you know, and as my studies testify, I have been advocating the closer study of these texts and their integration into the broader Iranian historical and cultural context for quite a few years. The small number of scholars willing to engage with these texts continues to be a major problem in our field, unlike, for example, the field of Judeo-Arabic studies. The reasons for these are manifold, and I don't really want to go into them. Suffice it to mention one, namely one that my friend Daniel Tzadik has repeatedly questioned me about, why don't we have, or are there more clearly historical texts among these Judeo-Persian manuscripts? While it is true that there aren't, just as in Jewish historiography in general is rather sparse, Judeo-Persian manuscripts shed light, considerable light, on the intellectual and material culture of Iranian Jews. So it is intellectual history that Judeo-Persian manuscripts contribute to considerably, and therefore they're very worthwhile studying. With this rather broad goal in mind of giving you an impression of what Judeo-Persian manuscripts are like, I would like to show you in the brief time at my disposal a few colophons from Judeo-Persian manuscripts at the Jewish Theological Seminary and remark on what we can learn from them. But before I do so, I'd like to make a few comments about the production of Judeo-Persian manuscripts in Iran in general and some of their more important features. First of all, it is a valid question to ask why manuscript production continued in the Muslim world in general and in Iran and among Iranian Jews in particular, long after printing was introduced in the West, even as late as into the 20th century. Without embarking on the history of printing in the Muslim world, suffice it to mention that although block printing was introduced in Iran at the end of the 13th century, movable print arrived only in 1629, brought by Carmelite friars from Rome with the first printing press. In 1637, an Armenian press was established in New Julfa. So printing in Iran remained sporadic until well into the 19th century, when in 1855, a printing press was brought by Mirza Muhammad Saleh Shirazi. Even so, a great deal of printing remained lithographic. Thus, it's not surprising that manuscript production continued among Iranian Jews, as I said, even into the early 20th century. In the JTS collection, there is a manuscript dated 1953, I believe. It's interesting that the first Judeo-Persian printed copy of the Torah, which appeared in 1594, appeared in Istanbul, not in Iran. And it is also remarkable that when Judeo-Persian texts appeared in print in more substantial numbers, this also occurred outside Iran, in Jerusalem, issued by the printing press of the Bukharan scholar Shimon Chacham in the 1860s. The second general point I want to make about these manuscripts, especially about the JTS collection, it numbers about 195 manuscripts, and these were acquired from the purchases of E.N. Adler. He made 2 trips to Iran in 1896 and 1897, and then eventually in 1922-23 sold and donated his manuscripts to JTS. The majority of these manuscripts, some 66 out of the 195, are miscellanies. Most Hebrew manuscript collections, in fact, consist of miscellanies, and that too is a complex issue having to do with scarcity of paper and resources, most of all. So miscellanies are essentially a variety of texts bound in one codex. Although I refer to them as Judeo-Persian texts or manuscripts, numerous individual items in these miscellanies are actually in Hebrew. A great deal of the contents, perhaps about half, again, a closer statistical analysis is warranted, consists of original compositions by Iranian Jews. The rest is made up of translations, mostly from Hebrew and Aramaic, and copies in Hebrew script of Persian materials, such as classical Persian poetry and medical texts. Much material in these manuscripts, especially individual poems, are copied over and over and repeated and give you a very strong testament of what was popular, culturally popular among Iranian Jews, and a great indicator of popular tastes and needs, because some of these are medical remedies and spells and texts that have practical application. The physical appearance of Judeo-Persian manuscripts resembles that of the surrounding majority culture. Most are copied on locally produced Iranian paper of relatively low quality in a variety of light beiges known as Negaahi, straw-colored. Although almost a dozen manuscripts at JTS were copied on Italian paper with fairly recognizable watermarks. Manuscripts from Bukhara were copied mostly on thick bluish Russian paper and have distinct watermarks, again, that can be recognized. Evaluating provenance is crucial, of course, in evaluating these manuscripts, and paper is one way to try to date them when they don't have colophons. The square oriental script of the manuscript is of an average quality, although at least one 17th century scribe by the name of Nehemiah Amshal of Tabriz produced several works of exceptional calligraphic quality. Many works were copied by owners for their own use and tend to lack colophons, but some professional scribes are also attested to. Quite a few manuscripts at JTS were bound in lovely tooled leather bindings, and a number of them, 2 or 3 have lovely Qajar lacquered bindings. So I will now turn to show you a few colophons and tell you about specific manuscripts. And depending on the time, I may or may not go through most of my examples. First, I want to show you the two of my favorite lacquered covers at the JTS collection from the Qajar period. And they actually were made into greeting cards by JTS. The first example that I'm showing you is manuscript 1403, which is essentially a religious miscellany. It contains at least 14 items, and listen to the variety of these items. The first item is a lithograph fragment of the Passover Haggadah. Then there's Hebrew poetry by Israel Najjar, a poet who died in 1625, and it's essentially a Turkish Jewish poem. A Judeo-Persian translation of Psalm 107, fragment of a story, fragment from the Song of Songs, fragment of a Judeo-Persian translation of the book of Ecclesiastes, fragment of from the book of Judeo-Persian translation of Proverbs, fragment from a 16th century Judeo-Persian poet by the name of Ibrani, his Musibat Name, Judeo-Persian translation of Asara Haruge Malkut, a very important rabbinic theological text. Judeo-Persian translation of a poem by Ibn Gabirol, Spanish poet who died in 1058. His Keter Malkut is very popular in Judeo-Persian manuscript. A Judeo-Persian translation of the high holiday prayer Ud Netaneh Tokev. Judeo-Persian translations of Yom Kippur, Musaf, and Mincha. Hebrew prayers for good fortune, mostly consisting of a combination of psalms, and an 18th century copy of an original Judeo-Persian poet, that goes by the name of pseudonym of Amina. And the last item are a few printed pages from a Sidur printed in Livorno, Italy in 1864. What are we to make of such a hodgepodge? Well, we have a colophon in this text, and I'm going to, just for some of you, it will be fairly easy to read this. Some of you can get some of it. The colophon says, Tamam shud in tafsir Keter Malkut. So the colophon appears only after one particular item, the poem of Ibn Gabirol, Dar Bet, which is the second day after Shabbat, meaning Monday, Dar Taz, meaning the 16th, Mohe Tevet. You can see the hybrid form of the language using both Hebrew and Persian words in the year 5533, corresponding to 1773 of the Hebrew calendar. Clearly a composite codex, tremendous variety, lots of different hands in it. A family book, people putting things into it, people probably taking things, hoarding of religious texts, a desire to know what the Hebrew prayers mean, therefore Judeo-Persian translations. Last night's concert was a lovely revelation for me, because when the singers sang Yaribon, they did it with the Judeo-Persian translation. Now, absolutely every Judeo-Persian manuscript has at least 1 or 2 copies of Yaribon in it with the Judeo-Persian translation. So just as we now have prayer books, with Hebrew and English, Iranian Jews clearly wanted to know what they were saying. So to me, this is a moving religious miscellany. Each and every one of these items in the text is worthy of study and finding out just how does it compare with Ibn Gabirol's editions of Keter Malkut, or with particular renditions of other poems. And the classical Persian poems that are copied in Nadir, how do they work with the classical canon? So this is one example. I could say, you know, a lot more about it. Let me move on to a more or less a secular miscellany. This is manuscript 1410. Here we have Judeo-Persian poetry. Sometimes it's not easy to identify whether this is original Judeo-Persian poetry or Judeo-Persian copy of classical Persian poetry. Unless we have someday in the computerized age a real index, if we don't have, you know, clear indications that it's a Hebrew poem, you don't really know the identity very clearly. Anonymous quatrains, lots of rubaiyat. Are they original? Hard to tell. Hebrew poems, some by Judah Halevi, classical Spanish poems, Yitzhak ben Hayat, Sadia Gaon, Judeo-Persian translation of the Wisdom of Ben Sira, a bilingual Hebrew Judeo-Persian poem by Shmuel ben Pir Ahmad, is an 18th century poet, on Asharot, which is you know, a genre by itself on the 630 commandments. One of the difficulties I had as I worked on this, on cataloging a huge collection, was how do you designate what category they belong to? I call this secular when, of course, there are clearly religious items in here, such as the Asharot. I went by the rule of thumb that if the content of a particular codex the majority of it tended to be secular, I lumped it as a secular miscellany. Here again, we have several hands, and we have two colophons after two items. The first colophon is this one on 57 verso. تمام شد in کتاب بن سیرا در روز گیمل, the Tuesday, هول موعد پسخ, 5441, corresponding to 1681 لیتسیرا, al yad fakir ve hakir, some you can see that it's damaged. امید که مبارک باشد بر نویسنده و بر خواننده، هر آن شخصی که طمع کند بردارد. Amen, all kinds of imprecations on and blessings on whoever would read it. I think I have, no, I don't have the second colophon is actually from 1708. So here we have a first colophon from 1681, the second one from 1708. This book is in the family with blank pages, and people are adding to it favorites, you know, a kind of album, a kind of anthology, a family anthology. Again, different hands, different scribes, and only one scribe named after the second colophon as Abraham ben Mulamir Adam. Who is he? Only, you know, probably one of the owners of the manuscript. The third colophon I'm showing you is from, by the way, as you look at them, you can see the tremendous variety of scripts and the lack of education, or, you know, some of them are better than others. 1428 is actually a collection of tales and midrashim, primarily about Abraham. And it is hard to tell what period it comes from. My guess, my more or less educated guess, is that it's 19th century, which is what you can say about the bulk of these texts. Again, the availability of paper makes it more likely that a large number of these texts, though their content may be earlier, the actual books are late. The colophon is interesting because although the date is not there, it have very nice conventional, it expresses conventional Messianic sentiments. و در سفر خیم تویم نویسد, whoever reads it should be inscribed into the book of good life. با زود مشیخ به ما بفرست و از گلوت ما را خلاصی یابیم. You see the mixture of galut is Hebrew, Mashiach is Hebrew. و بایت شلیشی چونین که داوید هملך علیه السلام فرموده بنای یروشلایم. Nidche Israel, not properly spelled. Then he quotes Malachi, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before coming to the awesome, fearful day. So conventional messianic expressions, but strong expressions, especially if it's a 19th century codex. The next colophon is very close to my heart, as I did my doctoral dissertation on it, and it's number 1444. It is a copy of Kitabe Anusi, the Book of the Forced Converts, the first Judeo-Persian chronicle known to us by Baba ibn Lutf, and it deals with the sporadic persecution of Iranian Jews between 1617 to 1662. One of the nice things in this particular colophon is that the paper is clearly Italian, and there is a watermark that identifies it as an 18th century piece of paper. So Gio Gattia di Ferrari, 19, you can look it up, you can look up the paper, which is it was exciting to me. And we don't have the name of the copyist, but we have the name of the owner. In Kitabe Baboy, as Male Bamuni ben Mula David ben Mula Bamuni, har kes ki o beduzad ben Afrin Yechye is Hebrew. Whoever steals it should be cursed. Ki khata bashad, because it's sinning. Har kes ki bechunad be afarin Hashem bash, and very colloquially spelled. It's a very valued codex, also from the, because it's on good paper, and it is an important historical document that still awaits complete edition. The next one, and stop me, 5 minutes, then you know what? I'm going to skip. No, I'm not. Okay, I do. I want to. This is a codex of tales and spells. Lots of Judeo-Persian manuscripts contain very interesting spells, probably of very ancient origins. I have not studied this, but they're interesting. How to make somebody fall in love with you, how to make someone recover from this and that. So they're what we call more or less practical Kabbalah. This one, in addition to spells, has a variety of stories, quasi-midrashic, more rabbinic stories about Moses and Solomon, righteous men and women. Some of these come from Sefer HaYashar. Then also stories about Aristotle, Galen, famous merchants. And the most interesting thing about the colophon is that it is the property of a woman. In Kitabe Ma'asiyot, of this book of tales, as male tuti bat hakim Yecheskel, har kes ki bechonad afarin Hashem bashad, and again the imprecations. We know it's 19th century because in the JTS collection we have 4 books that are owned by Tuti. Now, Tuti in Persian, for those of you who don't know, means parrot. I don't know if this is a nickname for such a person or is actually her name. The second book that I'm showing, 1452, is also owned by her and consists entirely of Judeo-Persian transcriptions of classical Persian poems, mostly by Sadi. And what's interesting is that the 19th century woman knows the poetry of Sadi, wants to have it at hand, and has it at hand in the Hebrew alphabet. And her claim to fame is not that she's Tuti, but that she's Tuti bat Hakim Yecheskel, and Hamula Harofeh Hamufhak. So she is the daughter of a physician, and therefore can afford books. There are 4 such books, that she owns in the JTS collection. One of them, we have no idea how many more she could have owned, but the 2 others are a copy of a Yusuf Vazuleikha epic, not Jami's, but probably the one by Cholet, and a copy of Drashot or sermons by a particular rabbi, Jacob ben Rabbi Paltiel, and this has a colophon of 1865. So we know that Tutti lived in the 19th century. In 1865, she owned at least 4 very fine books and was an educated woman who could read the Hebrew alphabet. The last example is important because it's really a religious text, Mishnah and Talmud. It's a miscellany of texts from the Pentateuch and Mishnayot, lots of Mishnayot, with accompanying Gemara, Talmud, and also texts from Midrash Rabbah from pertaining to Shavuot. What is interesting here is to show you that up on top at the title, you have Seder Lehoshana Rabbah, which is a transliteration in Persian letters of a Hebrew title going the other way around, and showing you that in fact it is not correct to assume that Jews stuck with Judeo-Persian because they didn't know Persian or the Persian script, but many of them undoubtedly by the 19th century certainly knew the Persian script fluidly, but held on to this traditional way of expressing themselves, and probably for their own children had to write it in the Persian alphabet, that it's a reverse process. Here the scribe gives the date of 1725 and gives a long, his name is Solomon ben Mullah Abdullah ben Mullah Khan ben Mullah Elijah ben Mullah Inayat ben Mullah Obadiah ben Mullah Eliezer. It's nice. It's obviously over generations both of owning the book, of family pride, of going back, if not to the middle of the first millennium, certainly considerably. So these texts are just a very small sample, and there's so much that I can't tell you about now. The type of script, the contents of each one of them, the repetitions. Every one of these reveals an important facet of the intellectual life of Iranian Jewry in the pre-modern period, in the Middle Ages. Thank you.